And okay, got it. All right. Yes, and also what social and contextual factors, okay, may constrain their choices of linguistic expression. So when we say social and contextual factors, we mean who they are communicating with and what kind of relationships, I mean social relationships, do they have with one another, and where does the interaction take place. And pragmatic is also concerned with the effects, right? So what effects that their choices, create on one another. So basically, pragmatic is concerned with meaning in interaction, right? And by meaning, we mean we don't mean utterance meaning. We mean speaker meaning. Oh, I have problem moving between my slide. So let me see. Effects, right? So what effects that their choices, create on one another. So basically, pragmatic is concerned with meaning in interaction, right? And by meaning, we mean what happened? I don't know what happened.
Oh, really?
Yes. Can you hear me? It's quite strange.
I can hear you perfectly here, ma'am.
Okay, because it's quite strange that my voice tend to come after the slide. Anyway, okay, so what we learned is pragmatic is concerned with meaning in interaction, right? And by meaning, we mean speaker meaning. We don't mean utterance meaning. And an example that shows the difference between utterance meaning and speaker meaning is the one that we discussed in the last lecture. So utterance meaning is what we say, the literal meaning of what we say. And speaker meaning is our intended meaning, what we mean by what we say. Okay, so last week we looked at this conversation between two people where I say, that was an excellent movie, which is a comment, right, on a movie. And B say, well, and then a little pause, I thought the cinematography was spectacular and some parts were brilliant. So now, what we say on the surface here is just a comment on some parts of the movie, but what B actually means beyond what he says is a disagreement, right? He disagrees with A, that the movie was excellent. So pragmatic is concerned with this meaning, the intended meaning, the speaker meaning, right? Rather than just the utterance meaning. Okay, and we also last week we also talked about the contextual factors, the social and contextual factors that constrain linguistic choices, and I will talk more about this in the lecture on politeness, right, which is next week. So we are going to look at these three factors at more depth, right, when we discuss the theory of politeness or linguistic politeness. But basically, there's three social and contextual factors that we always consider when we choose, linguistic forms and means to express our meaning in interaction. And these factors are power, right, the power difference between the speakers or the language users, the social distance, okay, and the degree of imposition. So powers here means who are the participants and what is the power relationship between them. Are they equal, conversational partners, okay, in terms of their social status, for example, friends or colleagues, or are they unequal, right, partners in terms of social position? For example, teacher and students, right? I mean, teacher has a higher position, right? Higher social position as compared to their students. Or a manager versus an employee, okay? So an employee has a lower social status compared to a manager, right? So when we talk about power, we mean the social relationship, the social status, and the social position between the participants in conversation. In terms of distance, we mean the degree of familiarity, between participants. So how well do they know each other? How well do they feel, or how well do they know each other? How comfortable do they feel, okay, with each other? Are they close friends, or are they just colleagues, or are they family members, or are they just acquaintances, or are they total strangers? So in terms of social distance, we have close people, we have people who are familiar with each other, and people who are unfamiliar with each other. For example, strangers or new acquaintances. In terms of imposition, we mean what are the sorry. Oh, we means what are the participants' rights and obligations in the context. For example, if I make a request, okay, for you to turn on your camera, and I say, can everyone turn on your camera, please? Right? Do I have the right to make such a request? I suppose that I do, because I'm the speaker, right, in the lecture. Are you obliged, or are they obliged to, for example, apologize if you step on someone's foot, or if you break a precious vase that they have just bought? Are you obliged to make an apology? Okay, so those are the things that are concerned with imposition. What is the degree of inconvenience that one participant may cause the other with their message or act? Okay, so in terms of imposition, we means the degree of inconvenience that we cause to each other by what we say, okay, in conversation. So we should note that social and contextual factors are actually assessed or evaluated very differently in different cultures. Now, some researchers, categorize cultures into two groups, okay, high power distance culture and low power distant cultures. So high power distant cultures are like most Asian societies, where the power difference, okay, between high status people and low status people is really huge. Okay, and for example, the power difference between a manager and an employee, the power difference between a teacher and a student is really big, right? That's why we usually address authority figures such as our boss, our teacher, people of higher social status, respectfully and formally. We don't address them by, for example, first name, just like friends, right? Like in my language, for example, we need to address the teacher with a title, right? And some honorifics as well, okay, to show our respect. Whereas in low power distant cultures, meaning the cultures where the difference in terms of power between high status and low status people is quite small, and where people are quite, where people are treated more or less as equal partners, right? For example, most Western cultures, then we would not need to address our manager. Yeah, I don't know what happened. There's a lot of echo. Yeah, anyway, then in those cultures, we would not address our boss with title. Okay, we can address them by names, and how we address people usually depends on how well we know them, rather than how much more powerful they are compared to us. Okay, so we talk more about this in the next lecture on politeness. But anyway, those are the contents that we have covered, okay, in the first lecture, and I hope that it makes sense. So yes, so today we are talking about speech acts, and I'm going to introduce two important theorists in pragmatics, John Austin and John Searle. They're all pioneer researchers, okay, in theory of speech acts. And we are going to look at how to analyze speech act in interaction. And we talk about speech act across cultures. So cross-cultural communication, what happens when people don't share the same linguistic norms or don't share the same social cultural norms, and they get together and they try to do speech acts, what can happen? And then I'll touch on teaching second language pragmatics a little bit at the end of the lecture. So I hope that is clear enough. Do I need to speak a bit more slowly, or is the pace okay?
Okay, it's okay.
All right, good. Okay, thank you. Right, so the first person, that the person who is very important, right, in theory of speech act is this guy, okay, John Austin. He wrote only one book, okay, how to do things with words. but it's a very important book in the field. Okay, so whoever learns pragmatics has to read it. Okay, he actually didn't write this book, right? I mean, the book was published after he passed away. As you can see, the book was published in 1962, and he passed away in 1960. So actually, his colleagues, okay, published the book based on a collection of his lecture. So actually, the book was based on the series of lecture that he gave at, I think, Harvard University. All right. Okay. So what happened? And why the theory of speech act is so important in linguistics in general and in pragmatics in particular. Okay. So let's do some historical background here. Okay. Now the interest in speech act, as we can say, right, can be traced back to the idea that we use language not only to describe phenomena, okay, in the real world, but also to do things, to do physical things, okay? So the founding father of the theory of speech act is Austin, as I said, right? He's a British language philosopher, okay? And Austin's initial idea about speech acts were motivated by the limitations that were found with logical positivism, okay? A school of thought that was very influential in the 1930s, okay? So long time ago, okay? So those people, right, the logical positivists or philosophers who supported this logical positivism assumed that the only philosophically interesting function of language is making true or false statements. So that's the only meaningful function of language. We use language to verify, okay, whether what people say is true or false. Okay, that's the point of logical positivism. So, for example, if I say it's 2:30 now and it's shining, okay, then you can verify this statement against the real world because it's not 2:30 in my time zone, and I think it's also not 2:30 yet in Indonesia, right? And I don't know whether it is shining or raining in Indonesia, but you can actually verify whether my sentence, okay, or my statement is 2:30 and it's shining, true or false. Or when you say Duchess of Cambridge is beautiful, you can also verify this statement that is maybe it's true. Okay. So yeah. So for logical positivists, I said again, a school of thought that is very important, right? In the 1930s, for them, then language is only used for one function, which is verifying whether statements are true or false, or making true or false sentences. Okay, but Austin didn't agree with that, right? He didn't agree with that. He observed that we can do more with language, right? Because some sentences are not employed or are not said to make statements, but because we can't say whether they are true or false. Okay, so so for example, when I say happy birthday, or when I say shut the door, please. Okay, or can you turn on your camera, please? Okay, we can't really verify whether those statements are true or false because they don't describe a phenomenon in the real world. Okay, they function differently. Okay, so happy birthday is a wish, right? Birthday wish, and shut the door is a request, right? So and another observation that Austin made is there are a lot of declarative sentences whose purpose is not just to say things, but to get things done. That's the most important thing, right? So we use language to get things done, to do things, rather than just to describe things. Okay. So I don't know what I put here. Yeah, when uttered by the proper, it's proper speaker by the appropriate speaker in the appropriate context. Okay, so for example, when you say when a priest say I I now pronounce you man and wife, for example, right? When this utterance is said by a Christian vicar or priest in a church, for example, right? Then this sentence function to marry two people and to acknowledge that they are a legitimately married couple or legally married couple. Okay, but it must be uttered by the appropriate speaker in appropriate context. So if I say that to my friend, that would not count, right, as an action, because I am not a priest and I'm not in the church, right? So I don't have, in other words, I don't have the institutional rights to marry people, so I can't say that. So if I say that, it's only a joke. It's not an action. Or when a boy say, I promise I will never leave you again, to a girl that he loves, for example, this is not just a statement. This is a promise. Okay, so he is performing the act of promising here, and he's bound because it's an action, right? Promising is an action, so he's bound with his words. And if he breaks the promise, he will be the one to blame. Okay, so that's what Austin has observed about the function of language, which is very important. We use language to do things, okay, rather than just to describe things. And Austin described, I say he tried to distinguish the two kinds of statements. Okay, the kind of statement or sentences whose purpose is to make statements and to describe things. Okay, are called constitutives. Okay, so constitutives are the kind of statements that can be verified and they're used to describe the real world phenomenon in the real world. So sentences like "it's 2:30 and it's shining" is termed constitutives by Austin. Okay, and performative is different, right? Performative is the kind of statements that we say in order to do things. So if you say, if you are a priest and you are in a church and you marry two people and you say, I now pronounce you man and wife. Or if you are a conference, a head of the conference organization committee, and you say, I announce that the conference is open, for example, then you are actually performing an action, right? The action of opening the conference. So that kind of statement are called performatives. Okay, so far so good. Does it make sense so far? Right? Okay, so how can we tell the difference between performatives and constitutives? According to Austin, okay, the differences between constitutives and performatives can be tested, okay, by firstly looking at its function, okay. Looking at it for, we can say, syntactic and functional properties. Okay, so syntactically speaking, or in terms of grammar, right? In terms of grammar, constitutives, okay, can take verbs in any tense, any aspect. So you can say it's raining outside, but performative, okay, can only take what we call performative verb. So pronounce is what we call a performative verb. And performative verbs are verbs that are used to do things. And they usually are in the present simple tense, okay? Indicative mood and active voice and first person. Okay, so those are performative verbs. Okay, so I announce, I pronounce, I declare, okay? I nominate, I promise, I warn, I apologize, I request, I command, I thank, for example. So if you say, I requested him, for example, I requested him to open the door, it is not a performative anymore because the verb was used in the past tense, right? But when you say, I request that you open the door now, then it is a performative because you use it in present simple, okay? I hope that makes sense, all right? So according to Austin, that's how we can tell the differences, or how can we distinguish between performatives and constitutives. So again, constitutive takes any verb tense, any aspect. Okay, you can say it's raining outside, it rained yesterday, it's going to rain tomorrow. But performatives, only performative verbs in the present tense, Okay, indicative mood, active voice, and first person. Okay, another test is you can try to insert hereby, okay, in the sentence, between the subject and the verb in the sentence. Constative, don't take hereby. So you can say that you cannot say it's hereby raining outside. It doesn't make sense, okay? But you can say, I hereby pronounce you man and wife, all right? And of course, pragmatically speaking or functionally speaking, constatives are used to say something about the state of affairs, to describe, okay, what is happening in the real world. Whereas performatives are used to perform an action. Now, this is a very important observation, okay, because it makes sense, right? But if we think carefully, there's a problem with Austin's distinction between constatives and performatives. Okay, if you look at this example, this is an image that I downloaded from Google, and think about its function. Okay, what is the function of this sentence? I mean, what is the speaker meaning here? What is the intended meaning or pragmatic meaning of this utterance? Okay, so anyone? Any guess? Any good guess? What does it mean? What is the meaning? What is the implied meaning of this sentence? What kind of act does this sentence perform? What is the function of it? There are some questions that can't be answered by Google. And this is an announcement or a statement, right? That is outside a church. So the real meaning is not about question that can be answered by Google. Okay, the intended meaning is the question can only be answered by God and come to church. Okay, so that's an invitation for people to come to church. Okay, so basically, pragmatically speaking, we can say that this sentence can do things too. It can also be classified as a performative in Austin's sense, but it doesn't have the performative verb. Okay, there's no performative verb here. There's no verb like I invite you to come to the church. No performative verb here. But we can still infer the intended meaning that this is an invitation. Okay, so that's the problem. Or if you look at, if you think of, everyday conversation, the kind of conversation that people have in the morning after they get up, before they get out of home for work, for school, so when a mom say to a child, do you know what time is it? It's not just a question of time, right? Because if you look at the child's answer, I am getting up. Then, do you know what time is it? It's actually a complaint that, it's quite late now and you haven't gotten up yet for school, okay? Or if you look at questions that I can't find my socks, said by a child to her mom in the morning, it's not just a statement that I can't find my sock. It's a request. Can you help me to find my sock? Or it can be a complaint. Where did you put my socks? Okay. Or if like the dad, right, say to the mom, cornflakes, please. Okay. Then this is a request for the mom to pass the cornflakes. Okay. Have you seen my trainer? No. Why should I? Or be careful. Bye, mom. Okay. Don't worry. Somebody left the door open. They all have a function. They all function to do something. So when you say somebody left the door open, it may be a request for your sibling, okay, to close it, for example. So the problem with Austin's dichotomy or say distinction between constative and performative is the boundaries between the two types of statement are very blurred, okay? When we talk about syntactic, okay, properties. Because a lot of sentences can perform an action without needing to use a performative verb. Okay, so if we look back at the performative verb here, okay, we can make a request by saying it's so cold in here. Okay, for someone to turn on the heater, or you can just make a request by saying, I was wondering if you have some time to help me, please. So you see that there's no need to use the word request. Okay, but you can still perform the action of requesting. So that's a problem with Austin's distinction. And And Austin is a very smart guy. So of course he knows that, right? He realized that. Okay, so he realized that in everyday language, many utterances without a performative verb can also do things. Okay, and actually the number of sentences, right? I mean, the number of these sentences far exceeds the number of performative verbs, all right, available in a language. So the list of performative verbs that is available in any language is restricted. There's only a small number of performative verbs, okay? Whereas the sentences that we can say to do things, okay, is much larger and is infinitive, actually. So Austin realized that, and he changed his mind, right? He realized that performatives are not a special class of sentences, okay, but almost every sentence, almost all sentences or utterances in everyday language can get things done, okay? So he changed his mind and now he revised his theory and he say, you know, most sentences that we say in real life can do things. So let's call them speech acts, okay, instead of performative. So he just abandoned the term constitutive and performatives, and he opted for the term speech acts, okay, to describe the kind of sentences that we use to say things. And the reason why there's so many utterances that can be used to do things even without using a performative verb is because our intended meaning is very context dependent, okay? So you know, whether it's going to rain a statement or a rejection of an invitation depends very much on the context. So if, let's say, two people look out of the window and complain about the weather, and one say, oh, it's going to rain. So it's a statement about the weather, or maybe a complaint about the weather, but a prediction, right? But if a person, okay, asks another person out, say, how about going out for a walk, and the other person says it's going to rain, that can be counted as a rejection of the suggestions. So it really depends on the context. Okay, so what is speech acts? So according to Austin, right, when we do things or when we say things, okay, we do three things at the same time. Okay, so when we use words to get things done, we do three things at the same time. So the first things that we do is the act of saying something. We actually produce the utterances. Okay, and he calls it locutionary act. Okay, so locutionary act is the act of producing the actual utterances. Okay, so we put words together, we articulate it, and we pronounce it. Okay, elocutionary act is the act of meaning something by saying something. Okay, so our intended meaning, what we mean by what we say. Okay, what we want to do with our utterances. So let's say when I say, oh, it's so cold in here, okay, that the locutionary act is to put together all this word, oh, it's so cold in here, and say it out loud. But the elocutionary act is I'm trying to ask my daughter to close the door and to turn on the heat pump, for example. Okay, and finally, the perlocutionary act is actually the effect of what we say. Okay, the effect that is achieved through the locution and elocution, meaning the impact that we create with our messages. So as soon as I say, oh, it's so cold in here, my daughter understood it, okay, understood my intention, and she stood up and closed the door and turned on the heater, for example, right? So that's what we call impact. Okay, so let me give you some more example to make it more easy to understand. If you recall this email, right, that we shared in the last week lecture, remember? Okay, an email request from a student to a lecturer, and student say, hello, my name is, and I missed today's lecture because I am sick. I would like to know about assignment 2. The whole email here, every word here, okay, is called locution. It means the utterance, the actual utterance, okay? The elocution is the request. I would like to know more about assignment 2 means you explain the assignment 2 to me. I request that you do that. Okay, so that's the elocution. And the perlocution is the effect that the message create on the recipient. So the teacher say, oh, it's so rude, imposing, it's so imposing and authoritative, lacking in social interaction, abrupt, self-centered, lacking sensitivity to others. So all of these are perlocutionary effects, and the student may not get the request granted because of that. Okay, because he didn't or she didn't, express her meaning appropriately, socially appropriately. So he or she may not get the request granted. Okay, so that's the perlocutional effect. Another example is, if you recall this example that I shared in the previous lecture, are you free tonight? Well, I was planning on getting home early. Oh, okay. Well, see you bright and early tomorrow. So if we look at the literal meaning of the conversation, of everything that people say here, they are called locutionary acts, right? They are locution. They are, the actual utterances that people say. But there is another layer of meaning behind it. So are you free tonight is what we call a pre-invitation. Okay, so you're testing the water, all right, trying to find out if the person, if B is available to accept your invitation. Okay, so that's a pre-invitation, and that is the elocution, your intended meaning by asking, are you free tonight? It's not an information question, it's a pre-invitation. And when B say, well, I was planning on getting home early. Okay, B was talking about his own plan. That is the locution. But the elocution is, I signal to you that I am not available to accept your invitation. Okay, and because of that signal that I, finally canceled the upcoming invitation, I didn't produce the actual invitation because I received the signal that his invitation will not be accepted. Okay, so he said, okay, well, see you bright and early tomorrow. So the cancellation of the invitation here is the perlocution, the effect of the conversation, the effect of what people have been exchanging so far. Okay, yeah, so makes sense, right? So that's about speech acts. Okay, so in other words, I mean, if you recall the title of Austin's book, How to Do Things with Words, that's actually speech acts. How do we use language in order to do communicative acts, to express our communicative intentions, to get people to do things for us, to convey, okay, our communicative meaning, for example. So how to what we can do with language in social interaction. Okay, right. Okay, so that's about Austin. And Austin's theory is very important. It plays a very central role in linguistics, and because he talked about the functional aspect of language. Okay, so we don't just use language. We don't just, I mean, previously, right, linguists were only interested in the formal aspect of language, right? But with Austin, okay, we shift our attention to the functional aspect of language. Okay, why do we use language? We use language for certain functions. Okay, so there's another person that I would like to introduce here, which is John Searles. And his theory is also very important. He's the person who made major contributions to Austin's theory of speech act as well. And I chose to focus on indirect speech acts, which is a contribution that Searles made. Okay, so he's the one who developed the theory of speech acts proposed by Austin further. By introducing the notion of indirectness or indirect speech acts. What he say is, direct speech acts mean the kind of acts where there's a transparent relationship between form and functions. Okay, and indirect speech acts means, the kind of speech acts where there's no such relationships between, the form and the functions. So there's no correspondence between what we say and what we mean. Okay, the elocutionary force, meaning the intended meaning, okay, does not derive from the surface structure. indirect speech acts, and he also say that indirect speech acts are universal, meaning it exists in every language, in every culture, and it makes up the majority in everyday conversation. So what he say is, in everyday conversation, in everyday communication, we rely on indirectness, okay, to communicate our communicative intention, our pragmatic meanings, rather than using direct forms. Okay, so it sounds a bit abstract, but I'm going to give you some example to understand them better. Okay, so if we think about form and functions, there are three main forms or syntactic forms, right, of sentences. So we have like declarative form, for example, I'm looking for salt, and imperative form, pass the salt, please. And interrogative form, could you please pass the salt? Okay, they all have different functions or primary functions. The primary functions of a declarative is to make a statement. Okay, I'm looking for salt. The primary function of an imperative is to give a command, pass the salt, please. And the primary function of an interrogative is to make questions. Could you please pass the salt? Okay, so when there is a correspondence between form and function, meaning when you use imperative form to make a request, like when you tell your child, open the door or shut the door, okay, that is called direct request. Okay, because there is a match between the form of the sentence and its pragmatic function. Okay, it's social function. Okay, but when you say, could you please pass the salt? Okay, you use a question to make a request. So there is a mismatch between the functions and the form here. Okay, because the function, the primary function of an interrogative is to ask question. But when you use a question for a different function, which is to make request, okay, we call this an indirect request. Okay, same about declarative. So when you say, I'm looking for the salt, you are giving a hint that, can somebody pass me the salt, please? But you didn't say it directly. So there is also a mismatch between the form and the function. That's why we call it an indirect speech acts. So what Searle is trying to say here is pragmatics doesn't assume, okay, a correspondence or a one-on-one correspondence between form and functions. Okay, what we say and what we mean may be very different. Okay, and the larger distance between what we say and what we mean, the more effort that our recipient or our hearer need to put into processing in order to understand our meaning, our real meaning, our intended meaning. Okay. So in this example, okay, pass the salt, please, is the direct request, whereas could you please pass the salt and I'm looking for the salt is indirect request. Okay, so that's what Searle say. There's another way of looking at directness as well. Okay, so Blom-Kolka 1987. This is also a very important name in pragmatics, especially in cross-cultural pragmatics. Okay, she said that there's another way of looking at directness. And indirectness. And she said that the directness level of a speech act is determined by the degree of elocutionary transparency. It sounds very abstract, right? And thus the amount of effort needed to interpret the elocutionary point of the act. The more indirect the mode of realization, the higher will be the interpretive demands. It sounds very, very abstract. But what she say generally is direct speech acts, indirect speech acts, the intention is quite transparent. We can tell right away. Okay, we don't need a lot of effort in order to understand the people's meaning. So when I say, for example, your essay is very badly written, it's very poorly written. Okay, it is a direct criticism, and you can tell very clearly. Okay, because my intention is transparent. But when I say something like, how about improving, okay, this part of the essay, you can still tell that I am not happy with the essay, but you need to put a bit more effort into understanding my intended meaning. But when I say something like, I think your essay is very well typed, it's very different, right? I mean, like, for example, when you ask me, what do you think about my essay? And I say, I think it's very well typed. It's actually an indirect criticism. I don't like the essay, but I didn't say it directly. I commented on a feature that is not important. That is, it is well typed. Okay. Or if I ask you, how much time did you put into your essay? All right. So it's also an indirect criticism. But in order to understand my intended meaning, you need to put more effort into, arriving or processing what I'm trying to say. So in other words, the meaning is less transparent. Okay, so we call it indirect speech acts. Another example is when you say you are cordially invited to a staff dinner on Monday, 29 November 2010. This is a direct invitation because you can say that the intention is very transparent. You can immediately recognize that this is an invitation. Okay, but when, let's say, consider a conversation between two people. When I say, I'll be home tomorrow, and we say, so will I. Okay, it's more difficult to try to arrive at the people's intended meaning here. So what is A trying to say? I'll be home tomorrow. When she's texting to B, for example, it might be an invitation to come over. Okay, I'll be home tomorrow, let's come over, right? We don't know. And B say, so will I. So it may be a joke, like B may already understand A's intended meaning, but B is making a joke, or maybe B didn't understand the meaning, so B say, so will I. So it's more difficult to understand this kind of conversation because the intention of the speakers are not transparent, and we call this indirect speech acts. Does it make sense so far? Okay, so Blankencar and Osteen in a very famous project, which is called cross-cultural. So the CCSARP here means cross-cultural speech acts realization project. So they look at 8 different languages, and then they look at how speakers of those 8 different languages, okay, linguistically express request and apologies. Okay, and based on this kind of data, they come up with 2 kinds of indirectness, which they call conventional indirectness and non-conventional indirectness. Now, conventional directness means the routines, the language forms or expressions or patterns of discourse have been routinized, have been conventionalized. So every member of the speech community, every competent member of the speech community can immediately recognize the intentions of the speaker, okay? And that's why we call them context independent, okay, indirectness. So this kind of indirectness doesn't require context to understand, okay? So questions such as, do you have the time in English means, what time is it? Everyone knows. Every competent speaker of English knows that. Or I was wondering if you could possibly be kind enough to give me a lift is a request. Every competent English speaker understands the intention. May I have your IC, please? This is another request. Okay, so these are examples of conventional indirect speech acts where the intentions, where there is still a mismatch between form and function. For example, we use question in order to make a request. Okay, so they are still indirect requests, but the intention can be recognized immediately because they rely on conventionalized language forms. Okay, another example of conventionally indirect speech act is giving an excuse, okay, to turn down an invitation. So everyone knows. So when, for example, someone issues an invitation, let's go out, or let's go out for coffee, or let's go out for dinner, or let me take you out for dinner, for example, and then the other person respond, I'm very busy today, or I have an assignment to do today. Every competent speaker can recognize immediately that it is a rejection, although the rejection is not conveyed directly, right? And why is it? Because giving an excuse to turn down a rejection is a conventionalized kind of expression. Okay, conventionally indirect rejections. Okay, right. So that's to do with conventional indirectness. And conventional indirectness, we can say that it exists in many languages, I would say, right? Not sure about Indonesian, you may want to reflect on that. But in Vietnamese, yes, we do use conventional indirectness for making requests, for making suggestions, for making rejections, okay? And another kind of indirectness is called non-conventional indirectness. And they are basically hints, okay? And they are very subtle. They can be very subtle. And that's why they depend on context to be interpreted. They require context in order to interpret. So when you say something like, it's cold in here, okay, you may mean that it's too cold. Can you turn on the heater? Or you may say something about, or you may mean, because it's so cold, okay, let's move to another room to talk, for example. So the same sentence can mean so different meanings, okay, depending on different contexts, depending on what is happening, okay, and who are you talking to, and what is the topic, for example, right? So this kind of indirect speech acts are called non-conventionally because the meaning is not attached to any predictable patterns of discourse or patterns of expressions, okay, or specific language forms, okay. The linguistic realizations can be so varied, right? So the meaning can be expressed in so many different ways, whereas conventional indirect speech acts are usually realized using kind of a limited number of expressions only. All right, so I hope it's clear enough. All right, so analyzing speech act strategies, okay. I am going to share with you a document. Let me see. Okay, so where is it? I'm going to share with you a document in the chat room. Oh, can't find it. Yep, here it is. And let's look at it together. Yeah. So can everyone see it now?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Do you want to open it and then we can look at it together? All right. All right, so can everyone open it now? Right? Okay,
Yes,
so
we already open it.
Yeah, so if you take a look at the what we call realization strategy, let's look at requests as an example, right? How do researchers, how do pragmaticians analyze language data, okay, to look at the way that people use language to express their pragmatic meanings? For example, how do people use language to make requests in English, all right? So researchers usually look at different things, okay? They look at the directness level, how direct people are when they express requests. This is very important because then it can allow researchers to compare across languages and across cultures, okay? And later we'll see that different languages prefer different types of realization strategies. Some languages prefer directness, whereas languages like English, for example, prefers conventional indirectness. Okay, in English, we rarely use imperative forms in order to make a request because it's considered rude. Okay, we only use imperatives in very restricted situations. For example, when we like in urgent situation and we tell people watch out or look out, okay, or be careful, right? In normal situation, we would rather opt for conventional indirectness, so asking question in order to make request, okay? But in languages like, for example, Russian, or in my language, for example, in Vietnamese, okay, people prefer to use directness like imperative forms, and they try to express politeness using different kinds of or other kinds of linguistic devices. Okay, but they prefer directness. All right, so directness is important. And then we look at semantic formulas. Semantic formulas mean semantic devices, okay, that people use in order to realize their pragmatic intents, to express their pragmatic intents. And look at perspectives and modification. Modification is another important feature. Modification is modification means the kind of linguistic forms or devices that we use in order to soften the impact of our acts, okay, in order to, you know, like try to minimize the inconvenience, the trouble that we cause to other people, okay? And it's to do with politeness. So we use modification in order to express politeness to each other. Okay, so let's look at the data here. Okay, so in terms of request perspective, okay, in English, we have 4 kinds of perspective. Okay, speaker-oriented perspective, for example, using I could borrow your notes from yesterday class. Okay, so asking to borrow someone's notes. So do you think that I could borrow instead of can you lend me? Okay, so can you lend me is hearer-oriented, but speaker-oriented is do you think I could borrow? Hearer-oriented is like could you tidy up the kitchen soon, or could you lend me your notes? Inclusive means using the we, the inclusive we, okay? So could we please clean up, okay? Or how about us cleaning up together, all right? Or let's clean up together. So including both the speaker and the hearer in the sentence. Or impersonal. Impersonal means, you know, the request is not oriented towards the speaker or the hearer, but you know, we use the impersonal structure. For example, it might not be a bad idea to get it cleaned up, or it might be a good idea to go out now. Okay, so this is what we call impersonal. Now, can you guess, right, in English, right, what types of perspectives, okay, are preferred by native speakers? Any good guess? Do you think I could borrow your notes, or can you lend me your notes? Which perspective do you think is preferred by native speaker? Any good guess? All right, so research says that, okay, so according to research, speaker-oriented perspectives is preferred by native speaker of English because it can help to reduce the degree of inconvenience caused to the hearer, because you don't orient the request to them, you orient it towards yourself. Okay, so you say could I borrow rather than can you? Okay, right, so that's the first aspect of analysis. The second aspect is we look at directness level and semantic formulas. Okay, in terms of directness, we have 3 kinds of directness, as I said, right? Direct request versus conventionally indirect request versus non-conventionally indirect request. So under direct request, we have what we call mood derivable. Is a very abstract linguistic term, but basically is imperative request. So you produce a request using imperative forms, like for example, leave me alone, or clean this up, please, shut the door, open the door, keep the door open, right? So those are called imperative requests, and they are the most direct kinds of requests. Okay, they top the rank, okay, in terms of directness. We also have performative, meaning using performative verbs, and we mentioned performative verb at the beginning of the lesson, right? So I am asking you, I'm asking you not to park the car here. Or today I received you know, like a report from my boss, and she said I request that Dr. Nguyen do this. All right, so that's a performative request. I request that. Okay, so or I would like to ask you to give your lecture a week earlier. Okay, I would like to ask you. Okay, so those are called performative requests, and they are very direct as well. Okay, or we also have what we call statement of obligation. Okay, you will have to move your car. So a police officer, right, saying to a driver, "Ma'am, you will have to move your car." or this is a kind of request that you usually produce to your child. You will have to do your homework, okay, before you can play the iPad. Or one statement, I want you to do that. I need you to do that. I wish you would stop bothering me, okay? So those 4 kinds of requests are considered very direct, which native speakers of English don't use very often in normal situations, okay? And then we have conventionally indirect requests, and we have suggestory formula, for example, how about cleaning up? Okay, so why don't you come and clear up the mess you made last night, for example, or preparatory. Okay, preparatory are just questions asking about the hearer's willingness to perform the requested act, or asking about the hearer's ability, okay, to perform the requested act. Okay, so they are questions like, can you clear up the kitchen, please? Could you clear up the kitchen, please? Would you mind moving your car, please? I was wondering if you could write me a letter of recommendation. Okay, so all this kind of requests are called conventionally indirect requests because they are recognizable immediately by competent speakers of the community, right? But still, their elocutionary force is not directly conveyed. And then we have hints, all kinds of hints, strong hints, mild hints. For example, you've left this kitchen in a right mess, meaning can you, okay, clean it up? Or when, okay, a girl say to a boy, I'm a nun, okay, just, it mean that I'm not going out with you, or stop bothering me, something like that, right? So it's hints. Okay. So that's how directness level is identified. And then researchers also try to identify modification as well, and again, modification are all kinds of devices that we use in order to express politeness, okay, to soften our messages, to soften the impact of our face-strengthening act, okay? So there are 2 kinds of modification. External modifications are discourse moves that occur outside of the request, okay, but they function as a supportive move, okay, they function as supportive move for the request. For example, before, in English especially, okay, we don't produce requests immediately because request is considered very imposing, okay, imposing on people's time, on their will, on their freedom of action, okay? So we don't produce requests immediately. We usually have to delay the request by doing a certain things before we actually, producing the request. Okay, so we beat around the bush a bit, right? So we may check the hearer's availability before we make a request. We call it pre-request, okay, or pre-invitation, as we see in the example before, right? So checking on availability, for example, are you going in the direction of the town? And if so, is it possible to join you? So, and if so, is possible to join you is a request, but it's only produced after the first move. Are you going in the direction of the town? Or, for example, if you want to talk to your colleagues and ask for their help with something, you would open the conversation with, hey, do you have a minute? Can I come over and talk to you? All right, so you don't immediately produce the request, but say something, okay, before that to check that they are available to hear the request. Getting commitments, like, will you do me a favor? Could you please perhaps lend me your note for a few days? So before you say, could you perhaps lend me your notes for a few days, you say, will you do me a favor? Okay, I just wrote an email to my student today to ask them to complete the course evaluation questionnaire for me. And I produce a request as follows. I say, I have a favor to ask, all right? If you haven't completed the questionnaire, I wonder if you could spare a few minutes to complete it for me. So getting commitment is, I have a favor to ask, all right? So you prepare by saying that you prepare the recipients for the upcoming request. Make it less direct, right? Okay, grounder means giving the reason for the request, okay? And this is very important, right? We don't usually give requests without giving a reason why we have to do that. I missed the class yesterday. Could I borrow your notes? Okay. Or if you come up, I mean, how extensive the grounder is depends on how big or how small your request is. So again, depending on the degree of imposition of your request on the recipient. If you borrow someone just the class notes, you can say something like, I missed the class yesterday and I'm reviewing for my exam. Do you think I could borrow your notes? But if you ask someone to lend you $1,000, you will have to give much more extended reason. Okay. And you have to promise to return, so you have to say a lot more. Okay. You can't just say, I need money to buy a laptop. Could you, lend me $1,000? You would say something like, you know what? My mom promised to buy me a laptop, but she has some problem transferring money. And, I haven't received my pay yet. So I wonder if there's any chance that I could borrow you the money to buy the laptop, right? So you have to give a lot of reasons. Sweeteners, meaning complimenting people. You have beautiful handwriting. Would it be possible to borrow your notes for a few days? I usually get this kind of sweeteners from my student. For example, when they want me to read their first draft of their assignment and give feedback, they'll say something nice before that. They'll say, oh, I enjoy your lesson today. Do you think that you could read my chapter and give me some feedback on it, right? They don't produce the request immediately, okay? This is a strategy that is very much preferred by students. Dishonors means, trying to avoid imposing on the hearer. So you say something like, excuse me, I hope you don't mind. I hope you don't think I'm being forward. Okay, I hope you don't mind. I'm very sorry for troubling you. I'm very sorry that I have to ask you for this, for example, right? But is there any chance for a leave home? Cost minimizer, meaning, trying to compensate for your act, try to minimize the inconvenience that you caused to them. Pardon me, but could you give me a lift if you are going my way only? Okay. Or if you borrow someone's car, you say, I buy you a full tank of petrol, right? So to compensate for your request, for the trouble, for the inconvenience that it cost them. Or in email, for example, when we write emails to people to ask for something, you usually say, my apologies, or I'm sorry for the inconvenience, or I'm sorry for the trouble, something like that, right? That's called cost minimizers. So all these strategies are called external modification because they occur outside of the request, right? This is the request, but they occur either before or after the request in order to support the request, okay? We also have internal modification, meaning the linguistic devices that occur within the speech act. For example, we can use questions, okay, as a way to make the request less direct, okay? Could you do the cleaning up instead of do it, okay? Do the cleaning up. You say, could you do the cleaning up? You can also use negation. I'm not sure about Indonesian, Bahasa Indonesian, but in my language, we don't use negation in order to modify the request. But in English, it's very, very common. So you ask something like, if you wouldn't mind, or, I don't think that you would be kind enough to do something. Right? It sounds very weird in my language, but it's common in English, right? So when we use negation, okay, to down-tone your request, past tense, I'm not sure if you are aware of this, but English speakers use a lot of, they prefer to use past tense in order to sound tentative. Okay, so when they say I thought, it doesn't mean that it happened in the past. It is happening now, but they say it so that they can sound less certain, more tentative, and more polite. So I wanted to ask for postponement, or I wondered, or I was wondering. Okay, so English speakers tend to say I was wondering. It's more polite than I wonder. Okay, it's more mitigated. Okay, embedded if clause. Okay, I would appreciate it if you let me alone. I would appreciate it if, or I wonder if. Okay, I would be grateful if. Okay, so the longer the request, the more polite it is. Consultative devices like, do you think I could? Okay, understated such as, could you tidy up a bit, so you down-tone it. Okay, or you have hedges that I would really help. It would really help if you did something about the kitchen. So hedges mean being vague, all right? So other common hedges in English are sort of or kind of, right? Can you sort of clean up the kitchen? All right, it's more mitigated than can you clean up the kitchen? Okay, downtoners, will you be able, perhaps? So downtoners are like perhaps, maybe, probably, possibly. So when we give suggestion, for example, we don't say, why don't you do that? Because it's too direct, right? We may say something like, perhaps if you could consider that idea, that would be good, for example, right? So downtoners, perhaps, maybes. All right, so those are the strategies that researchers in pragmatics usually rely on or employ in order to analyze speech acts. Okay, we call this speech act analysis. All right, so let's go back to our lecture notes and look at the conversation here. All right, so there's a conversation here between Naomi and Brenda. You just take a look at it and then try to analyze a few sentences. Okay, I don't think we have time to analyze everything, but just do at least a few turns. All right, I give you 3 minutes to look through the conversation. All right, so you done? Are you done with reading the conversation? Okay, so what is the main request here? Can you pick up the request? It's a long conversation. How many turns is it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So there are 13 turns altogether. That's a very long conversation. But there's only one request. And what is the request? What is the main request? Anyone? Anyone can answer that? So the request is?
Number 1, maybe, if you got a minute.
If you got a minute? Have you got a minute? That's not the main request, right? That's what we call a pre-request, a pre-move, a pre-sequence move. All right. So actually, the main request is here. I was really hoping I could have the weekend free. That's the main request. She asked for a weekend free so that she can spend time with her parents. Okay. So that's the main request. And you can see that the main request is not produced until what turn? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, until turn 7. So people say a lot of things before they actually produce a request. And why is it? Because requesting is a very imposing act in English. Okay, so as I said before, different cultures have different assessment of contextual factors. Okay, whether a speech act is considered imposing or causing inconvenience to people depends on culture. Okay, so in my culture, for example, making requests is not really concerned, is not really considered very imposing or highly imposing, because we are a collectively oriented culture, and we tend to help each other, and time is not considered so precious, right? In my culture, so we don't have to do so much beating around the bush when we do requests. But in English, because requesting is considered very imposing, so people don't produce it immediately, right? So they have to say, if you look at the first turn, and Naomi say, "Hi Brenda, have you got a minute?" Okay, this is to prepare Brenda for the upcoming request. Okay, this is what we call checking on availability. Have you got a minute, right? And then, "Oh yeah, come in, sit down, Naomi." So there's a go ahead signal. So Naomi, you walk in and sit down, look at the stack of paperwork. I say, "You look like you've got a bit of fun morning ahead." All right, so this is an implied meaning, right? She's not having fun, doing paperwork is not having fun. But then why Naomi say that? Okay, so it's kind of a joke, making a joke in order to do what? Why do we make joke? To establish rapport with people, okay, to create harmony with people, okay, to sound friendly, to create the kind of co-membership to the same culture, okay. Yeah, my favorite paperwork, laugh. So Brenda got it, and then they exchange jokes as a way of establishing a friendly atmosphere. And then Naomi say, "I've got a bit of that to do myself after lunch." So again, establishing common ground, okay. And now Brenda, so starting from here, now Brenda, okay, so only after doing some preparation work, establishing harmony, solidarity, common ground, then Naomi say, "Now Brenda, I was just wondering if I could talk to you about the latest roster you've just put up." So this is what we call getting commitment, right? So can you, do you think you can talk to me about that? "Oh, don't tell me there's another problem." Sounds apologetic, right? So cost minimizer. What is it? Where is it? Okay, sorry. Oh, it must be a nightmare trying to get all the sheet cover at the moment. But I've got a bit of a problem. So this is a grounder, giving reason for your request, right? I've got a bit of a problem. So acknowledging that, I'm trying, if I ask you to do the roster again, I am trying to, I'm causing more work. I'm creating more work for you, but I've got a bit of a problem. I just had a call from my mom last night, and she and my dad are flying down to Melbourne next weekend. It's the first time that they've been able to come down since I moved here. So all the reason, all the justification for why I need to make a request, then I was really hoping I could have the weekend free. This is the main request. Okay, so the main request is only produced after the speaker has already prepared the hearer for the upcoming request. Okay, establishing a friendly atmosphere to make the to increase the chance of having her request accepted by the recipient, right? To give a lot of reasons. Okay, then she make the request. "Oh, Naomi, you know how short-staffed we are at the moment, right? How short-staffed we are at the moment. So it's kind of like a signal that I may not be able to grant your request." Okay, "Yes, I do. I just thought maybe. So this is what we call internal modifier, right? Thought maybe. I could. So all the model and downtoners that I use to tone down the impact of your message. If could swap the following weekend with color, I'm happy to do 2 in a row. So this is kind of like offer compensation. Okay, if I can have the weekend free, I can swap, my duties with color. Okay. "Oh yes, so that would be great." All right. So and then that'd be great. Thanks, Brenda. Okay. So that's the end of the conversation. And there's a lot of, so you can see that there's a lot of external modification that are used for just only one request, and the request itself is also internally modified as well. Okay. "I was really hoping I could." So instead of saying "I hope," she said "I was really hoping." So using the past tense to sound like uncertain, to sound tentative, to give the recipient or the hearer options to reject the request. Okay, so that's how English speakers do requests, right? They do a lot of modification, a lot of mitigation, right? To tone down the perlocutionary effect of their request. Okay. Right, so greeting, pre-request, the request itself, reason, offer of compensation, and closing down, and all the all the thing that highlighted here, the phrases that I highlighted here are what we call internal modifiers, right? Okay, so yes, we don't have time to analyze another conversation, but basically that's how people do speech act analysis in research. Okay, let's move on to speech act across culture because we have only half an hour left. So yes, as I said before, right, different languages have different way of linguistically realizing pragmatic meaning, right, or conveying pragmatic meanings. Now, many speech acts are culture specific, meaning they exist in one culture but not another. Maybe you can tell me about this. I don't know how true it is. I read it from Thomas, 1995, and what she said is the speech act of divorcing exists in the Muslim culture. Okay, so this is what she said. The husband utters, "I hereby divorce you" 3 times under appropriate circumstances. So there must be an appropriate context. Even an unintentional use of this utterance can effect a divorce. So yes, so what she said is the speech act of divorcing exists in the Muslim culture, and this is the example that she provided. Okay, a terrible tangle has arisen in Pakistan over a local soap opera. So this happened in the movie. Star. All right. Usman Pizada, I don't know this person, divorced his television wife, okay, in traditional Muslim style. But this happened in a movie, not real life, pronouncing talak, right? Did I say it right? Talak. I divorced thee 3 times. Okay. The trouble was that his TV spouse was played by his real wife, Samina. So they are real life husband and wife, and they're also husband and wife in the movie. And in the movie, he divorced her by saying talak 3 times. Now, what do you call it? The ulemas, right, are saying that the divorce is binding, even though the formula was spoken in the interest of art. The decree maintained that the Prophet ordained that in 3 matters, marriage, divorce, and the freeing of slaves, words uttered unintentionally or even in jest cannot be withdrawn. Divorce they are, and divorce they must remain. It has been reported in the media that in some Muslim culture, husbands now can even use emails or text messages to divorce their wives. So this is from Thomas, 1995, and I don't know how true it is. Maybe you can tell me. Is it true? Or is it not? Any comments?
Yes, it's true, I think, ma'am. Yeah.
I see. Okay. I don't think the same exists in the Western culture. I don't know. But in my culture, in the old days, yes, you can also divorce by just, no, the wife couldn't divorce the husband, but the husband could divorce the wife by writing a letter.
Yeah.
So writing a letter saying that I divorce you, then they remain divorced. Yeah. So yes. So speech acts, when I say speech acts are culture specific, right? They may, certain speech acts may exist in some cultures, but not others. Okay. The same context may call for different speech acts in different cultures as well. For example, stepping on someone's toe in West Africa. Oh my God, this is Africa. Right, not. When you step on someone's toe, you are expected to apologize in English. But for the Akans in West Africa, they express sympathy, "Oh, poor you," instead of apologizing. And in my culture, guess what we do when we step on someone's toe? Any guess? We don't do anything. We smile. So it may be very confusing to foreigners who visit Vietnam and got their toes stepped on by a Vietnamese. And instead of being apologized to, okay, the other person, all they see is the other person smiling, right? So what is the smile? All right. leaving a party, the English will thank and compliment the host. So thanks for having me, and it was a great party. But the Japanese apologize the host, like, I have intruded on you. All right. What do you say when you leave a party in Bahasa Indonesian? Do you say thanks for having me? It's a great time. I had a great time. Or what do you say? What did you say?
Yes, we said that, I think.
Oh,
Thank you, and we give the reason why we have to leave.
Oh, okay. All right. So giving a reason why you have to leave. Yes. Interesting. Yeah. Do we say anything in Vietnamese? No, we just say goodbye. Yeah, we just say goodbye. Okay. And maybe see you next time, or next time it will be on me. I will treat you, something like that. Right. Okay. The same speech acts may be carried out differently in different cultures. All right. So this is a very interesting study by Ojianen 2009. What she did is she sent out one situation, right? This situation, okay? You were sick and missed a lecture. Now, bring up a fellow student to ask if you can borrow his or her notes, okay? And then she asked the respondent to write down what they would say in this situation. So she sent this situation to 400 students, university students. That's a big sample size, right? 400 university students who speak English, German, Polish, and Russian as the first language, okay? And ask these people what you would say in this situation in your language, okay? And this is what she found, okay? She categorized the responses into 3 groups: imperative request, for example, get the notes for me, mate, or questions, interrogative, right? Would it be okay if I borrow your notes? Or others, for example, I have to copy your notes tomorrow. All right. She categorized the responses, the 400 responses that she received, into 3 groups like this. And she saw that in English, 97% of requests take the question form. So English native speaker prefer question forms when they make requests. They don't say, give me the notes, lend me the notes, but they say, can I borrow your notes? Would it be okay if I borrow your notes? Okay. For German, okay, 88% of the requests are questions. Okay. For Polish, okay, the ratio between questions and imperatives become smaller. So 20% versus 75%. And when it comes to Russian, 65% are question forms and 35% are imperative requests. So what we can tell from here, from these findings, is different languages, okay, prefer different realization strategies when it comes to performing the acts of request. Okay, English speaker prefer question, and they use imperative request very, very rarely, okay, in this situation. Whereas for Russian speakers, the ratio between imperative request and question is much smaller compared to English. All right. Another interesting speech act is compliments and responding to compliments. Okay, so how do you respond to compliments in Indonesia? So if, like, let's say, for example, if I say, oh, you have a nice hairstyle, or you have a nice haircut, what would you say?
Oh, thank you for saying that.
Thank you for saying that. All right, so thank you. So accepting, right? Okay, so researchers, right, categorize strategies for expressing responses to compliments into 3 groups. Okay, the first group they call rejecting. Okay, the second group is thanking, and thanking. So thanking, say, oh, thanks, it's kind of you, it's very sweet of you to say that. Okay, rejecting includes disagreeing, say, no, I don't think it's beautiful, or expressing embarrassment, or explaining. Okay, so the speaker, the hearer didn't say no, but explain, for example, this is a very old sweater, or this is a very old hairstyle, right? or thanking only. Okay, so Chen, 1993. Okay, look at responses to compliment by Chinese speakers and American speakers of English. And when Chen look at Chinese data, this is what they find, right? For Chinese people, 95.73% of the time, they would reject the compliment. So they would say something like, no, I don't think my hairstyle is good. It was a very old one. It was cheap, okay? And they accept the compliment only 1% of the time, okay? They accept and downgrade, okay, the compliment for 3.41%. So most of the time, Chinese people, okay, would reject the compliment, right? And the reason is because of their politeness principle, okay, the maxim of modesty, all right? Modesty and humbleness are really valued in Chinese culture, all right? What about American? Okay, so Chen looked at American data, and Chen found that for American, okay, 39.28% of the time, they would accept the compliment. They may also return the compliment, okay? So accepting means thanking, agreeing with the compliment, expressing gladness, or joking, okay? Returning the compliment. So, oh yeah, I like your sweater too. Oh, I like your haircut too. Oh, you did an amazing job too, right? So returning compliment, offering object of compliment. You want a piece of it, right? Or encouraging, right? So they do that 18.50% of the time. They deflecting, okay? For example, they explain, you know, I had the haircut a long time ago, or doubting, okay? So meaning downgrading the compliment for 29.50% of the time. And they reject, okay, the compliment only 12.70% of the time. So we can see that there's a big contrast between Chinese speakers and American speakers of English in how they respond to compliments, okay? And interestingly, remember that this study was conducted in 1993, okay, so a long time ago. What about more recent data? Chen repeated this study on the same population. I mean, not the same participant, but the same population, the same region where she collected data in 1993. So Chen repeated the study again in 2010. All right, and this time Chen looked at the same population to see if there's any change in their ways of responding to requests. And Chen found that yes, there's a lot of changes for Chinese speakers, right? So they tend to accept compliment a lot more as compared to many decades ago. Okay, so 62.60% of the time they would accept the compliment. They would deflect the compliment for 28.27% of the time, and they reject the compliment only 9.13% of the time, meaning that they are moving towards, okay, the American norms of responding to compliments. And perhaps that's because of the influence, right, of the American culture, right, the pop culture, you know, through movies, through medias, on the young generations, right? So very interesting. Okay, there's another interesting comments from a researcher here, FKIP, that I would like to share with you, because I believe that a lot of you also experience this cross-cultural difficulty. Every year, I teach university students from around Europe who come to our university to take courses in their subject areas. They come to me for English classes. Once they have settled in, I always spend some time teasing out the cultural differences which they have become aware of. Invariably, they comment on the insincerity of their Irish counterparts. When I delve deeper, the same scenario is used to exemplify insincerity each time. So every time she asks, why do you think that Irish people are not genuine, are not sincere? she get the same response. They explain that when they walk around the campus, Iris' classmates seem very friendly. They smile and say, "Hello, how are you?" But as I stop to tell them how I am, they have kept walking. I have to explain to my student, right, that how are you in the context of a greeting is actually not meant as a question as to one's welfare. It is simply a greeting, and best reply with "how are you?" or a short reply like "great, see you around." Okay, so a lot of miscommunication may happen when people communicate across cultures because of the different ways that speakers of different languages express their meaning. So what happened here is the learners are not aware of the pragmatic functions of "how are you?" So "how are you?" is not a question of one's health status, but it's a greeting formula. It's a formulaic question, and it needs to be answered with a formulaic answer, right? So to "how are you?" we just say "great. What about you?" Right? Okay, good. All right. So Thomas, 1983, say that there's what we call pragmatic failure, right? So Thomas say that in cross-cultural communication, people may experience pragmatic failure, meaning they may make mistakes in producing and understanding situationally appropriate language behavior. And why is it? It's because of the differences, okay, that exist, okay, within the same community as well as across different communities. So within the same country, within the same culture, people may still misunderstand each other because of the generational gaps, because of the differences between different regional dialects or ethnic groups or gender or class or occupational groups, right? And yes, of course, communication breakdown also happen when, interculturally as well, like when people from different cultures come together and communicate. Now, if we recall what we talked about in the first lecture, then there are two types of pragmatic knowledge, okay? Pragmalinguistic and social pragmatics. So the first type is knowledge of linguistic forms and expression for conveying pragmatic meanings. So examples are form for making requests in English include, please call a taxi. Can you call a taxi, please? Would you please call a taxi? Would it be possible for you to call a taxi? Do you mind calling a taxi? I wonder if you could call a taxi, so on and so forth. So this is the linguistic devices that we use in order to convey our intention, okay, requestive intention. Another knowledge that is underlying pragmatics is called knowledge of social cultural norms, okay, governing linguistic choices. Okay, so in every culture, there's restrictions on what we can say in specific social relationship and specific situations. For example, when we sign off an email to a friend, we may say "right back soon." That sounds appropriate in English. But when we sign off an email to a professor in English, we don't say "right back soon," okay? Or when we sign off an email to someone we don't know, you would say "I look forward to hearing from you," rather than "right back soon," okay? So we say different things to different people. And that's because of the social rules, the social norms, okay? And expectation that govern what we can say to whom and when. So there are two kinds of knowledge underlying pragmatics, right? And a competent speaker, okay, must know both types of knowledge in order to communicate effectively, okay, in their community. And in cross-cultural communication, people tend to do transfer. They tend to do is they tend to transfer their first language forms as well as cultural norms, okay, when they speak a second language, okay, and this is what we call pragmatic failure. So when they transfer, so they may transfer first language expression or forms that do not convey equivalent pragmatic meaning in the target language. And Thomas, 1983, cited a very good example. So if you look at A and B here, B is a Russian speaker, A is an English speaker. And when they say, "Is it a good restaurant?" and we say, "Of course," then A is not happy, all right? Because "of course" has a very different meaning in English as compared to Russian. So for Russian, Of course, or конечно, right, just mean yes, certainly, yes, it did, right? So it's just an emphasis. But for English, right, of course means what a stupid question, because it's obvious, right? Obviously, it is a good restaurant. So, when you transfer a language form that doesn't have equivalent functional meaning, okay, to a second language, then that may cause pragmatic failure. Okay, so this is another example that I shared in the last lecture, right? You are wearing a very lovely dress and it fits you. Okay, a compliment from a male student to a female teacher. This is a pragmatic failure because the student transfer social norms of their first language culture. Okay, whereas these norms are not shared or are not accepted by the members of the target language culture. Okay, sometimes you make both kinds of pragmatic failure as well, and these examples are from my own PhD thesis. For my PhD study, I looked at how Vietnamese students and Australian students give constructive criticism on their peers' essay. And when I looked at the data by Vietnamese speaker and Australian speaker, I found that they give advice in a very different ways. Vietnamese speaker would say, you should give more fact, more evidence. I mean, you need to summarize the main point. You need to refer back to what you have been discussing about. You must pay attention to grammar. So very strong advice. But Australian speaker would say, maybe you could have used a few more lines here to explain a bit better, all right? So maybe you could have, and a bit. So, right? Oh, so I thought maybe if that one came after that one, perhaps that would be better. Okay. Or it could have been better to put a comma here. So, right. So you can see that Australian speakers or Australian students, right, give advice in a much softened manner, right? So they soften their advice or suggestions, they mitigate their suggestion and advice more frequently. And I asked my student, why that? Why, I wonder what happened here. As a Vietnamese speaker myself, I can understand that because in my language, we usually say you should do that. And we don't feel offended when people give advice like you should do this, or you must do that, or you need to do that. All right. We don't feel offended at all because you should, you must, and you need are just semantic formulas for giving advice, okay, and very commonly used in our language. But whereas for English, okay, advising someone to do something is kind of imposing because you are saying that you are better than them, and you are asking them to change, to accept your ideas, to consider your ideas. So it's considered, quite imposing. But for my culture, okay, now this is what a participant in my study said. Vietnamese people usually advise one another. Seniors advise juniors, people of the same age advise one another. This is a good way which is accepted by the society. So what is happening here is my participant transfer both the social cultural norms of the Vietnamese culture when they speak English, as well as the linguistic expression. Okay, you should, you need, and you must. This is what we usually say in Vietnamese. So they transfer both linguistic expression and social cultural norms when they communicate in English. And if they were paired to give feedback with an Australian student, they may offend their peers by giving such strong advice. Okay. So what that means is we see that second language learners may have a lot of difficulty, right, express their pragmatic meanings in the second language. Okay, so part of teaching a second language is teaching communicative competence, and part of communicative competence is pragmatic competence. We need to teach our students how to express their pragmatic meanings socially appropriately in the target language. And one way to do that is to raise their awareness, okay, of what we call the social and contextual factors that affect how people choose linguistic means and devices for expressing themselves. So consider this example. This is an example from a book written by pragmatic scholars to guide teachers how to teach pragmatics in a second language classroom. Okay, so students are given a situation to read, and this is a situation. The writer in this email is a graduate student who is about her professor's age. The student and the professor call each other by their first names. The student has known the professor through 3 of the professor's courses, so they know each other, right? The email was written 21 days before the due date. So after reading the situation, the students are asked to analyze the situation. So in terms of social status, the professor's status is higher, lower, or equal than to yours. So the answer should be higher, right? The professor's status is higher. In terms of distance, your relationship with the professor is close, fairly close, not so close, close at all. Now, there's individual variation, okay, in the response. But I would say C and D would not be the options here, right? Because the student and the professor have known, the student has taken 3 of the professor courses, so they've known each other for quite a long time. So I would say fairly close could be the options here. The imposition of the request. The request you are making is greatly imposing on the professor, moderately imposing on the professor, not imposing on the professor too much, not imposing on the professor at all. Now, you ask the professor to write you a letter of recommendation. Of course, it is imposing, but because the email was written 21 days before the due date, you've given your professor enough time to write. So I would say moderately imposing rather than greatly imposing, right? So students have to analyze that kind of situation. And after that, they read a model letter, okay, with annotation, okay? So subject, salutation, Kathy, right? Request, explanation and reason, notifying the deadline, thanks, Sudana, okay? Thanks and closing and signature. So they look at the model email with annotation, okay? And then they have to answer a question. What kind of language form does Jen use? How appropriate, do they sound? How directly or indirectly does Jen make a request and why? How does the context, like social status, distance, imposition of the request affect her language forms? What kind of information about the recommendation letter are provided? How important are they? What are the strategies for making the request polite and less imposing? So they have to analyze the model letter, okay? And the next step, they have to produce another email to, based on the model letter, right? And before they do that, they also need to analyze the situation. So they analyze the situation so that they can know what kind of linguistic expression they should choose, okay, when they write the letter. So this is one way of teaching second language pragmatics, to raise student awareness of the context and the effect of context on the choice of linguistic expression. And we can also get them to do role play. This is another good practice. Role plays mean, give them a situation, right? And then ask them to act out on the situation. So each speaker has a distinct role to play. Okay, and you can practice a range of speech acts using role play. Okay, suggestions, rejection, giving advice, giving complaint, requesting, right? A range of different speech acts. All right, so with that, I conclude my lecture, and I think we would have 4 minutes for Q&A if you have any questions.
Okay, students, is there any question? We have still 5 more minutes to go. Anyone? Raihan, maybe you want to have a question?
Not yet, sir.
Oh, not yet. How about the others?
Does it all make sense?
Everyone?
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
All right. So no questions so far. All right, good. Okay. Yes, I'm going to send the slides of this lecture and the previous lecture to Mr. Harry, so he can share them with you. Is that all right? And in the next lecture, I'm going to talk about politeness theories, and we are going to cover the major theories of linguistic politeness in pragmatics. And in the final session, because we have only 1 hour, I'm going to cover implicature, which is implied meaning. Yeah. All right.
All right, ma'am, you may share to me, and I would like to pass it to the students, all students.
Sure. Okay. Okay, so if there's no more, if there are no questions or there are no comments, let's call it a day. And then, yeah, I'll see you next week then. Have a good weekend.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor Nguyen. We'll see you again next weekend. Yeah.
Bye.
See you.
Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Nguyen.
Thank you.
Oke, thank you so much. Terima kasih adik-adik semuanya sudah berpartisipasi. Besok lagi tanyalah kalau ada pertanyaan ya, Raihan dan kawan-kawan. Halo.
Baik, Pak.
Sama Mami Zuria.
Ya, halo.
Ini nanti adik-adik mahasiswa mohon agar digerakkan lagi untuk lebih proaktif dalam berdiskusi ya, Mam. Nanti saya informasikan biar nanti Profesor Nguyennya nanti secara presentasinya itu setidaknya ini kan sudah pas jam 3 baru selesai ya tadi ya. Harapannya nanti mungkin yang pertemuan ke depan mungkin saya tak request sekitaran 20 menit sebelum jam 3 udah diselesaikan presentasinya biar nanti ada sesi tanya jawabnya. Seperti itu, Ji, Mam.
Ya. Pak Hadi.
Ya, dalam, Mam.
I predict that the topic of today is implicature.
Yes.
Jadi saya ngirim WA ke adik-adik ini gitu ya.
Okay.
Of implication.
Oh, I see. Maybe she changed a little bit regarding to the contents. Compare with the previous one who shared to you, ma'am.
Ya, oke, nggak apa-apa, Pak. Ya.
Oh, and once more, Mami.
Ya,
Profesor Nguyen minta konfirmasi terkait modul atau buku yang dipakai untuk mengajar anak-anak di sini yang mata kuliah pragmatik biar nanti beliau menyesuaikan dengan konteks yang ada dengan bukunya yang dipakai di sini biar nanti mungkin nggak jauh-jauh banget gitu loh, Mbak. Ya, oke Pak, nanti saya kirim itu ya Pak. Oh iya, siap, nanti biar disesuaikan. Nggih, terima kasih. Nggih, Mam Zuria dan adik-adik semuanya, thank you so much for joining. I do really appreciate it. I will see you again next week. Please be ready and be more active for the discussion. Okay? Let's just call it a day and let's just finish by saying Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. Thank you. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Okay.